thanks for being with us. We are very excited to have our session today on academic recovery, the comeback class, and want to welcome you into the room, briefly introduce our first speaker, and then we'll introduce the rest of the panelists and kick ourselves off in what I hope will be a good conversation. And if I do this right, I will have saved enough time for Q&A. I'm Christina Grant. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard University. There are a lot of people from DC looking back at me, and so I am also going to say I'm the former State Superintendent of Education for Washington, DC. I'd like to introduce you all to Dr. Thomas Kane, a professor of economics and education and the faculty director of the Center for Education Policy Research, who is going to take us to class. And so there will be a pop quiz. No, I'm joking. But do me a favor and give a round of applause as we bring Tom to the stage.
So thanks, everybody, for being here. I'm just going to try to lay the foundation for our discussion with the district leaders that have done the real work over the last 5 years. So this is joint work with Sean Reardon at Stanford, where we use the National Assessment of Educational Progress to put state test scores all on the NAEP scale, not just across states, but within states over time, to be able to just track district by district, now for more than 8,000 districts, what has been the trend in achievement going all the way back to 2009 in a comparable way. And so this graph is just illustrating why this is so important. The red line is what was happening, for instance, this is Illinois, what was happening to proficiency on the state test, and the blue line is what was happening to the Illinois NAEP. You see, between 2013 and 2015, there was a huge decline in proficiency in Illinois because of a change in their reading proficiency. And you see, actually, during that time period, NAEP scores were going up in Illinois. Then there was a long period of pretty substantial declines in reading scores on the NAEP in Illinois. But then between 2022 and 2024, there was a sharp increase in proficiency on the state test, but a continued decline on the NAEP. So because of this, I've just picked out Illinois, but this is true in every state. Dr. Brawley was talking about a similar thing happening in California right before our conversation started. This makes it impossible for any individual district to be able to say what has been our long-term trend, what has been happening to our achievement over time. We've had that with the main NAEP, but we've never had it at the district level beyond the 26 districts that are part of the TUDA assessments. So what we've done is done it district by district for 8,000 districts around the country going back to 2009 to suddenly make it possible to see like who's been on the been steadily improving and who has not been. Okay, now what we get when we don't have such a yardstick is just obfuscation. Here's data from Massachusetts. This is one district in Massachusetts, Lynn, Massachusetts. Large declines in the years before the pandemic, large declines during the pandemic. In fact, students in Lynn are about 2 grade equivalents behind where their counterparts were in 2019. 2 grade equivalents behind where their counterparts were in 2019. Yet if you read like the press release in Lynn when the latest MCAS results came out, you find no mention of that. In fact, you find 12 of our schools increased in their overall percentile ranking, and 3 schools exited from requiring assistance classification. We are proud of the efforts of our teachers and students. MCAS results provide important data. So you can read through the rest of the press release, but it makes it very hard for parents or community members or even teachers and students to know what has been happening in terms of achievement during the pandemic. And I'll come back to this later, because parents being misinformed about just what had been the size of the losses during the pandemic has been a constraint on district's ability to recover from the pandemic. Okay, so the data we used, we currently cover about 43 states, math and reading, about 8,700 school districts. It's 80% of U.S. total enrollment. Here's the website, educationrecoveryscorecard.org, if you want to look up your own district. I realize there's some charter folks here. We're going to be adding in the future, I hope, trends in achievement by district. Christina's laughing because we actually don't have that funded yet.
But tell the funder.
All right. So one thing that we've done a terrible job at as a field is describing the progress that has been made over time. There have been substantial improvements in achievement. I'm just showing here on NAEP what's happened in fourth grade math. So between 1990 and 2013, there was a 2.7 grade equivalent rise in math achievement in the U.S. that runs just directly counter to the narrative about just stagnant achievement. Anybody who is around, I see some folks with white hair in this room who were around schools in the 90s and are around schools now would know, okay, we still have a long ways to go, but there's been substantial progress over time. And I think our failure to tell that story is part of the reason why there's just lack of any faith in K-12 schools' ability to improve. Then, during the pandemic, there was a pretty sizable loss, and then the beginnings of a recovery between 22 and 24. Now, I've also wanted to just show what was happening to racial achievement gaps over this time period. These are in the similar scale. So you see just the magnitude of the rise in achievement relative to the racial achievement gaps are about 60% as large as the racial achievement gap was in 1990, the improvement in fourth grade math. But then between the early 90s and 2015, achievement gaps were narrowing between whites and blacks, between whites and Hispanics. Now, in almost every state, eighth grade math achievement increased and fourth grade math achievement increased. In most states, fourth grade reading achievement increased. It was eighth grade reading where there was less substantial progress between the 90s and 2015. But then between 19 and 2024, many states have seen large increases. So this is between 19 and 24, not 22. This is after the several years of recovery. Virginia remains almost a grade equivalent behind where they were in 2019. Only two states, Louisiana and Alabama, are above where they were in 2019 in math. And we have Dr. Sullivan here from Birmingham. In reading, similar story. Many states are almost remained in 2024, so several years after schools had reopened, remained a grade equivalent or close to a grade equivalent behind. Only one state is back above 2019 levels in reading, and that's Louisiana. Alabama's not far behind, still small decline, but close to back to where they were in 2019. Now, but we know it's not just the pandemic that's happened. So here's just, in this graph, I'm plotting what happened to the 90th percentile, the median, and the 10th percentile student in reading in particular. The gray area is the pandemic period. You can see the 10th percentile students, so the struggling students, were declining before the pandemic, declined through the pandemic. In fact, if I took away that gray area, it would be hard to identify where the pandemic was. That particularly at the bottom, we have a problem, a continuing problem. It's not just about what happened or didn't happen during the 2021 school year. There's been a continuing decline at the 10th percentile of reading achievement that we've somehow got to get a handle on and turn around. At the top end, the 90th percentile students were hardly affected by the pandemic in reading. In fact, in the years before, between 2010 and 2019, there was a small improvement in 4th grade reading and 8th grade reading at the 90th percentile. Okay, now we know that school closures were costly, but what people may not realize is just how they were differentially costly for poor students. So Horace Mann famously said that schools are the balance wheel of the social machinery. We saw that in action during the pandemic, so that, in places where, so this graph is just showing for high poverty schools, low poverty schools, and mid poverty schools are on the three different lines. The vertical axis is the magnitude of the loss. The horizontal axis is the percent of the school year that schools were closed. In places where schools reopened quickly in 2021, everybody lost about the same amount. Everybody lost ground, but everybody lost about the same amount of ground. It was in the places that remained closed for longer. Even the high-income schools lost ground, but they lost much less ground than high-poverty schools as a result of the school closures. So the being out of school was more costly in high-poverty communities than in low-poverty, high-income communities. Now, nationally, as I'm sure you've heard, chronic absenteeism has increased. In fact, it almost doubled between 19 and 2022. There's been some decline since 2022, but still nowhere near back to 2019 levels. And I would highlight that as one of our biggest challenges, is that during a time when students need more instructional time to catch up, students are receiving less instructional time because of absences. And in fact, absences are extremely costly, not just for the student that's absent, but for their peers when they come back in school, because if there's a different group of kids absent each day, a teacher is constantly having to reteach material. And the increase in absences was like the school closures, the increase in absences were larger in high poverty communities. This next table I'm just going to skip over. The bottom line from that table was that, okay, school closures, like with test scores, were related to increases in absenteeism, and the impacts, like with test scores, were larger on higher poverty communities. The school closures were not the only reason why absence rates have increased, but they were related to the increases in absenteeism. Now, I'm not going to explain to you how we tried to answer this question, but so we in this research we were trying to ask, okay, well, how much of a difference did the $190 billion make in federal pandemic relief? And that actually, you might say, gosh, isn't that an easy question to answer? Actually, no, it's hard because, as you know, the dollars were targeted based on poverty. And so it's hard to separate out what was the effect of poverty on the speed of recovery versus what was the effect of the dollars spent. And the way we were we think able to figure this out is the dollars were allocated based on how much Title I funding districts received in the fiscal year 2020. And it turns out there were huge differences in the amount of Title I funds districts received in 2020 based on what state they were in. So if you were in a small state like, South Dakota or New Hampshire, you might receive about $1,000 more per student than if you were in a state with low spending like Tennessee in terms of Title I dollars. But the pandemic multiplied that $1,000 difference by 10. So there was like a large difference, $10,000 difference in the amount of funding per student if you were in a very high poverty school in a small state versus other states. So we use that to try to infer what was the effect of the spending on recovery among similar districts that just happened to be in states that were the Title I formula meant they received a lot more money. That's how we were able to try to sort it out. And what we discovered was that the dollars had about the same effect, did have an effect, but it was pretty modest relative. It was about the same size effect you'd expect from a general revenue increase. And that's not surprising because it sort of was like a general revenue increase. There were very few strings attached and districts were only required to spend 20% on academic recovery. Okay. So here's one, let me see if, oh gosh, that graph got totally messed up. The biggest challenge that we faced during the pandemic was getting the message across on not what districts ought to be doing, but how much districts would have to do of those things to catch up. So based on the pre-pandemic research, we knew high dosage tutoring generated about a grade equivalent worth of growth. So let's say 10% of students got high dosage tutoring, real high dosage tutoring, 3 sessions a week for 36 weeks. Now, suppose that on top of that, we added double dose math, and suppose that 30% of students got double dose math. We know what the effect of double dose math was. Now, suppose on top of that, we got 75% of students to attend summer learning. Well, we have some pre-pandemic research on what the effect of summer learning is. And suppose on top of all of that, we did an additional 2.5 weeks of instruction. If you'd added all of that up, and that is more ambitious than most districts were able to try, you would have predicted about a half a grade equivalent worth of improvement. And some districts, like Richmond, Virginia, lost 1.5 grade equivalents during the pandemic. So they would have had to do that 3 years in a row in order to catch up. That was a big failure, I think, of the research and the policy community in conveying the message not on what to try, but how much of each of those things they would have to do in order to catch up. All right, so I'm getting near the end. But there have been a number of polls that have suggested that parents do not recognize just how far the children are behind. And just that fact, it imposes a constraint on what schools can do in terms of asking for additional, getting folks to sign up for summer learning, or having parents be concerned about the rise in absences, or asking for a tutor at school. So here are 4 recommendations at the end of the report that we emphasize. One is that even though the federal dollars expired at the end of September, for the most part, we urge states and districts to continue the academic catch-up efforts and find dollars to pay for that. Many states can set aside, 3% of their Title I dollars for direct student services like tutoring. And so we would urge states and districts to continue the academic catch-up efforts because kids have not caught up. Second, we would emphasize the importance of lowering student absenteeism, that this is one of the very few things that organizations outside of schools could be helping schools with right now. And that, so most mayors can't teach Algebra 1, but they could do a public information campaign, or they around absences. They could, work on providing, more transportation options to students. Employers could play a role too by giving more flexibility around school pickup and drop-off times. A third thing is encouraging teachers to inform parents if their child is behind grade level in math or reading, and to be doing it this spring before, just to give parents time to sign up for summer learning. And then finally, we urge states to be trying to measure the efficacy of the interventions they've been trying. So 41 states have tried some form of science of reading interventions. A number of states are implementing cell phone bans. Clearly, not everything is working because literacy continued to decline through 2024. So we don't have a decade to figure out which of those interventions were working and which weren't. I'm pretty sure not all of them were working, but I'm also pretty sure some of them likely were. And the problem is I just can't tell you which was which yet, and yet we've got to figure that out forthwith. Okay, now, here's one thing so one of the great things about this panel is we get to highlight the work that district leaders have been doing around the country. So in this graph, I'm just reporting what was the change between 2019 and 2024 by school district for many of the larger urban districts around the country. And you see just huge variation in the magnitude of the losses between 19 and 2024. Tulsa, this is math, Tulsa is more than a grade equivalent and a half behind where they were in 2019. But I've highlighted in hot pink a number of districts that we have emphasized, and somehow like my dots got put all over in the wrong places. They were in the right places when I submitted these. Anyway, so Compton Unified is right up there at the top in terms of just the magnitude of the improvement. They're actually back above where they were in 2019, almost half a grade equivalent back above. Birmingham is, if you can see them, I'll come down here. So Birmingham is right there. So just shy of where they were in 2019. and much further ahead than a lot of their peers, like Tulsa and Little Rock are a grade and a grade equivalent and a half behind. DC as a state is still about about half a grade equivalent behind, but still on their way to catching up. Now, in reading, again, Compton is back above where they were in 2019. Union City is back above. Birmingham is almost back to where they were in 2019. So the whole point of the Education Recovery Scorecard is to highlight what's happening at the district level. And this panel is about highlighting the work of districts that have done a terrific job in terms of catching up that don't normally get attention in the national spotlight. And I would hope that going forward, there'll be a lot more attention because of the Education Recovery Scorecard. So until now, it was hard. Compton was improving. I'm sure a lot of folks around California were aware of it, but there wasn't a national audience for it because just Compton wasn't a TUDA district. And now we've been able to put their scores, their trends and scores on the same scale. Same with Birmingham, Alabama. Large improvements over time, and it's not an entirely rosy picture. There are lots of districts that are way behind, but for the districts that have made substantial progress in helping students catch up, we want to make sure we're highlighting them.
Great, thank you, Tom. Tom got off the stage. I was like, I was giving you the eye, but you couldn't see me giving you the eye.
That's why I jumped in.
I know, I saw he ran. This is our life. Do me a quick second and also join me in a generous welcoming to Dr. Brawley, the Superintendent of Compton Unified School District, and Dr. Mark Sullivan, the Superintendent of Birmingham Public Schools. And so we've actually had the joy of merging the quantitative analysis that actually allows us to ask this very nuanced question and get true clarity on an answer. If you visit educationrecoveryscorecard.org, you actually will see case studies written on Birmingham Public Schools, Compton, Washington, D.C., which Tom did not say. Like, we recovered in reading. I was like, where's my dot? Man, I gave my life for that. I gave my life for that dot. No.
The dots got messed up.
But the beauty in the conversation that we want to shift to now really is the mission and vision of CEPR. We actually want to use data, high quality evidence, and build the bridge between research and practice. And you can tell everyone you spent some time with Harvard today. It's okay. Tell a friend. And in doing the work, we want to make sure that from higher education all the way into the classroom, individuals have an opportunity to not just hear snippets around what is working, but literally hear from leaders about the nuanced decisions that they made to drive the progress that we're seeing as we continue to know we have a lot of work ahead of us. So I'm going to start with a question. Both of your systems saw seismic gains in math and reading, Tom. In math and reading since the schools reopened from the pandemic. Can you quickly walk us through some of the decisions, investment strategies that you all were making? Quick example in DC, we made a $40 million investment in high impact tutoring. And so much of what Tom framed was the approach. It was not all 100,000 students. It was 10% of the students that were the most at-risk students. We partnered with, hey Kat, City Tutor, DC. That really helped us have laser-like insight into what was happening inside the school. Fun fact, if you don't change the master schedule, none of what you do will stick. But we also made really bold decisions, and you'll hear some of my colleagues talk about this. There was no virtual tutoring. Now, depending on how you feel about that, that's a choice that you would make. But for us, part of the in school every day was also creating a learning environment where students wanted to come to school. We partnered with a research institution. That was not the one I run. Let me be very clear. But what we learned is that there was not just a positive correlation in academic achievement. There was a positive correlation in attendance, particularly in middle school, and a positive correlation in social emotional learning. Students reported wanting to come to school, wanting and feeling seen in school, all from that investment. And so the nuance of the investment is what allows us to be a dot on the slide, but it's not just enough to say we did high impact tutoring. It is like, what did you do? How did you do it? And what did you learn? And so Dr. Brawley, kick us off with your thoughts on the decisions you made in Compton and what did you learn?
Sure. So key things that contributed to our recovery were strategic use of ESSER funding, as well as strategic use of data, and then last but not least, the stability of being a long-term superintendent, 13 years in Compton. And the research is pretty clear. You typically don't get results until after about the 5th year of a superintendent's tenure. So what do we do with the ESSER funding? We focused on high-impact tutoring in class. We knew that we had them there during the day. The ones that need it the most don't show up after school or on Saturdays, so we focused with in-class high-dosage tutoring in both ELA and math. So strategic interventions for those students in the classroom with the tutors, teachers teaching to the rest of the class while the tutors are in class, providing the direct instruction and strategies necessary for the students to master the standards that they were not having success with. But also combining that tutoring with other interventions that also happened after school and on the weekend as well during Saturday. So we talked about the ESSER funding, but the additional component was really strategic use of data. We implement Malcolm Baldrige performance standards protocol within the organization, so there's ongoing use of data. We benchmark our performance against our surrounding competitors, which are other school districts. There's about 7 of them around us. We set SMART goals to determine what their metrics are and what do we need in order to surpass them, to meet them or surpass them. I'll give you an example. When I first got there, graduation rates were 58%. A through G completion rate was 12%. Graduation rates now are 93%. They are the best in LA County for similarly situated school districts serving students like ours, also the best in the state of California.
I was going to say that's worth an applause.
And our A through G completion rate, which gets kids into CSUs and UC college system, also the best in Los Angeles County for similarly situated school districts, and the best in the state of California as well. So it's an intentional process that we have in place that I'll talk a little bit more about later. But the final thing that I indicated was the stability. I've been there 13 years. The governing board, in those 13 years, I've only had 4 board members turn over, 3 of which decided not to run, and the final one that turned over decided not to run. Well, I think I'll run, not going to run. Ran at the last minute, and people didn't know he was running, lost by 26 votes.
Wow. So good afternoon. I'm Mark Sullivan, Superintendent of Birmingham City Schools. And the things that we did in Birmingham, one, we brought in high-dose tutoring. We have 6 universities in our local area. And so I met with all of the university presidents, and I said, listen, we have this huge pot of money tied to ESSER. And we want to provide supports for our students and your students. And so we hired college students at $15 an hour with a partnership with United Way. We trained all of the college students on our instructional frameworks, and we put them in all of our schools. And what that did was 2 things. One, it helped us with providing tutoring, but secondly, it became, as a byproduct, many of those students who were majoring in something else, we began to hire those students when they graduated and they started teaching in our school district. The second thing that we did was we ensured, because I became superintendent in the spring of 2020, and it was really quiet, not much going on. And the second thing that we did was we started this process called intercessions. And what intercession is this, because after the pandemic, we were virtual for most of the pandemic. And we had, the reason why we did that, because in Alabama, unlike in other states, there was a lot of COVID denying, no mask wearing, and so there are 14 different school systems in my county, and there were 14 different ways to address COVID. But we had mask wearing, we did social distancing, we did all of that, but we were out of school for a lot because, you know, I lost 8 staff members during the pandemic. I lost 2 teachers from the same school in the same week. And it's very difficult for me as superintendent to say, you put a mask on your face, you'll be fine, and you've just lost 2 of your colleagues. And so we stayed virtual for a long period of time, and then once a vaccine became available, we partnered with the local university, UAB, to become a mass vaccination site. But we said that you have to vaccinate our staff members first. And so once we did that, coming into that summer, I said, you know what? We need to have a year-round school. And I said, you know, kids have been out of school for so long, we need to go year-round. And I took it to my school board. They were like, no. In fact, one of my school board members.
I was like, how'd that land?
In fact, one of my school board members said, you know, I'm running for office. We cannot do this now. And I said, well, you know, we just had a global pandemic. The whole world shut down. If we can't do it now, when can we do it? And so he said, you know, go to the public. So I did a survey. We surveyed our parents. They were like, no. We surveyed our teachers. They were no. We surveyed our students. They were hell no. So I said, well, we have to give our kids more time on instruction. So we compromised. I actually hired a PR firm, and the first thing they told me was, do not say year-round school. What you need to say is extended learning opportunities. That sounds a lot better. And so we went out and said, we're going to provide extended learning opportunities. Everybody was biting at the bit for that. And so we started school in August. We attend school for 9 weeks. And at the end of that 9 weeks, any student who has failed a class in the first 9 weeks, the first grading period, we open up our school for another week so they can make up some of those skills. Any child in 3rd grade or below who is reading below grade level, they're invited to the school. We have interventions, we have remediation. Our high school students, we do ACT prep. We also have field trips, we have mental health camps. And so the first time we did it, we have 20,000 students in Birmingham. 87% of them qualify for free reduced lunch. Every school is a Title I school. 11% Latino, 89% African American. And so we are a high poverty black and brown school district, but that does not limit our ability to be a high achieving black and brown school district.
Say it again.
And so the first time we did this, and we paid our bus drivers to come in during this week, we paid our lunchroom workers, our teachers to come in. And I told the teachers, I said, you know, if you want to go to south of France for this week and just recover, you can do that. If you want to sit on your couch and watch Netflix, you can do that. But if you want to work and come in, we're going to use this ESSER funds to pay you $60 an hour to come in. And we'll pay our bus drivers $30 an hour and our lunchroom workers $30 an hour. So they came in, and the first time we did it, we had 1,800 students. And I was thinking, man, this did not go well. And we did it 3 times a year. By the spring of that year, we had 6,000 students of our 20,000 students, about a third of our total student population in school when they didn't have to be. And by that summer, we had 10,000 students in school when they didn't have to be. What that equates to is an almost 200 days of instruction for our students. And we hired an outside agency to do an evaluation on all of our programs, our high-dose tutoring program, our intercession program, and what we've shown is that our intercessions and our high-dose tutoring, those students outperform students who are not participating. In fact, with the intercession, there are students who were scoring higher than other students at the beginning of the year. The students who participated in intercession were scoring lower. By the end of the year, they had flip-flopped. And so we went to the state of Alabama and we said, you know, ESSER money is going away. And the state of Alabama, the reddest state in the United States, gave one of the bluest cities, Birmingham, in the entire state, $1.8 million to continue our intercession process. So we've seen some improvements in Birmingham City Schools.
I mean, these two, let me tell you what we've been doing this a lot thus far. But Dr. Sullivan, I want to stay with you for for 1 second, and then Dr. Brawley, and invite you to respond as well. You touched it briefly, the end of recovery dollars. And so what is the road ahead? You know, we spend so much time, it was a cliff and everyone's gonna fall off of it, you know. How do you ensure that these investments, these interventions stay the course? It's true in DC as well. Because we were able to have a third party evaluate our investment in real time, not only were we able to pivot in real time, as we saw very similarly, I feel like the first 90 days when I got the report that only like an abysmal amount of students were getting tutored, I was like, I'm going to get fired.
Oh my God,
today. But by the end, very similarly, the evidence was able to show that it was such a sound investment that in Washington, D.C., high impact tutoring is now funded with local operating dollars. Even in a tight fiscal environment, that is one of the recovery investments that maintained. And so would love for you both to weigh in on, like, how did you prepare for this quote unquote impending doom and ensure that children still have access to what research has told us would work inside your system?
So we're very strategic at Birmingham. That's my academic officer back there with the camera. And so the moment we got this ESSER funding, we began planning for not having ESSER. And one of the things I kept telling my school board, because my school board was like, we got $19 million, and we can do this, and we can do this, and we can do this. And what I kept saying is that we can't fill a $19 million hole once this money is gone. So we have to be really strategic about how we support kids during this time frame, and then how do we move beyond that. And one of the things that we did was we kept meticulous records, and we made sure we had third party, not associated with the school system, to evaluate everything that we did. And so those, and including those things that we did prior to the pandemic, because, you know, before I became superintendent, we had a superintendent, and I won't, you know, we had superintendents in the past, and
That was so nicely stated. Nice job.
They had different philosophies, and I never forget this. One of our superintendents said that we had an inverted pyramid in our school district, and you know, where the majority of the students, typically in a pyramid, you have the majority of the students are on grade level, and you have a small percentage of students who need tier 2 and even a smaller percentage who need tier 3. And this superintendent said, well, the majority of our students need tier 2 and tier 3 assessments, supports. And the first thing that we did was, when I became superintendent, we threw that out the window. Because what I said was, if you say that, that speaks to expectations. So if you're a teacher and you walk in a classroom and you think the majority of the children are behind or below grade level, that's going to be how you teach. And so one of the things, my first meeting that I had with our principals, is that we're going to teach every child like they're gifted. And so as we began to look at how we're going to move away from ESSER, we start getting away from all of these remediation programs that we were paying for, and start looking at just-in-time interventions so that we don't get to a remediations. And so we got away from a lot of this remediation, and you know, a lot of those vendors were really upset because they made a lot of money off of us for a very long time, and we did not see the results from what they were doing. And so we start getting away from that. And then because we use a third-party evaluator, we were able to have data when we start applying for grants, and we start going, like when we went down to the State Department, we actually had our third-party evaluator to actually do a presentation along with us what the data showed, and then they were able to provide additional funding. And then, as I mentioned, we are a Title I school district. And so as we start looking at our set-asides over the top, we start prioritizing what those are. And then when we have conversations with our principals, because sometimes our principals think that that Title I money is theirs and they can spend it on anything. And what we did was we began to restrict what they spent it on, and they spent it on these programs that we have data behind that work. And so we are take some of that burden, that the financial burden is coming off the district and going back to the schools and saying, hey, we're going to pay for these tutors. These are the programs that you can use. Select from these programs. And then we hold them accountable, just like we did at the district level, for their results. And not only the results of the school, but the results of these individuals that they're partnering with. And so that's kind of been our strategy around, you know, moving beyond ESSER.
Dr. Brawley?
In Compton, the loss of ESSER funding will not impact us very much at all. In California, they have a Learning Recovery Block Grant. We will shift resources to be used out of that funding source. And we also have the Expanded Learning Opportunity Program, which provides additional enrichment for students after school. So we will make use of that funding as well. And we will also focus on the Title I funding. A lot of Title I funding, I don't want to say it's wasted, but it's not spent necessarily in the best use for student achievement outcomes. And so we'll be able to channel the Title I dollars into a more strategic use for student achievement outcomes. So, and the final thing, the tutoring agencies that we used, instead of paying them $48 an hour and $60 an hour, we will use our own tutors in-house. Bottom line was they stole our tutors by offering them more money to come work for them, and now we've increased the wage higher than what they're paying, and we will be able to provide it cheaper at about $24 an hour, as opposed to paying $48 or $60 an hour for an outside agency to come in and provide the services.
I think the one through line that you touched on briefly, but it's something that we've seen in all of the research, not just the states that have fully recovered or the districts that have bright spots, but there was an intentionality of leadership before the pandemic, through the pandemic, and on the other side. And like that sustained stewarding is I think, equally as important as some of the investments that were made. I want to take a second now and turn to the audience. Do you have a question? If so, let's see. That's what I like to see.
I like that.
Say your name loud and proud. Tell us where you're from. And we had 10 minutes, y'all. So a question.
My name's Alvin Irby, the founder of Barbershop Books, former kindergarten, first grade teacher. My question is about the role of social and emotional elements of learning. Barbershop Books, we focus on reading identity development, but I'm curious if you could talk about reading or math, identity, self-efficacy, confidence, engagement, motivation, and what role you feel that played in not only achieving these gains, but making them sticky.
Yeah, so I'll go really quickly. We in DC, we spoke a lot about high-impact tutoring. We did not give enough light to all of the investments we made in the science of reading. Multi-million-dollar investment in revising our structured literacy plan. And one of the artifacts that, to this day, I'm asking the chancellor to make me a part of the series, but we created a Readers Next Door series for students in Washington, D.C., where they had phonics primers, short stories that were for them, about them. So children going to Ben's Chili Bowl, and children learning about go-go music in their phonics instruction, children that look like them, sound like them, going in and out of the community that they lived in. I mean, we use recovery dollars to redesign a whole series so that when children go to a bookshelf, and contrary to what anyone tells you, it is critically important to see yourself in the books you read, and the teachers that serve you, and the communities that you operate in, and all children can see themselves, fun fact. And so I really resonated with that question, and we were intentional about redesigning high quality instructional materials that represented the children that were using them.
You answered it for everybody.
Oh, well, Thank you so much. No, Dr. Sullivan has his hand out.
You on top? Yeah.
In Alabama, you have to be really courageous to do that. And so one of the things that we did in Alabama, and Dr. Williams is our academic officer, I said, we will have books that represent the children that we teach. And, in Alabama, they're taking a lot of things out of the curriculum. In fact, I remember having a conversation with one of our Republican leaders in Alabama, and they talked about the civil rights movement. I said, so you're telling me that I have teachers who actually marched in the Children's March, that they can't talk about their own experiences? And so that's not a reality for us. That's one of the hills I told them we'll die on. And so we're going to provide books for our students. We're going to provide curriculum for our students that reflect them. And in fact, one of the things that we found during the pandemic was that, you know, when you say 15 minutes a day, children reading at home, it will impact their ability to read. The problem with that is that many students don't have books at home. And so we had, and one of the things that we've done through the pandemic and even beyond is that we've been giving backpacks with books so kids can have summer reading, and those books reflect the communities in which our children live. And so that's kind of a hill that we're willing to die on in Birmingham.
Another question?
Oh, you don't want me to answer that? In Compton, there's two major things that we do in regard to that. We have a rich partnership with Access Books, who has outfitted all of our libraries, as well as classroom reading materials for books to represent, with characters that represent them. And we also have an active partnership with another foundation known as J3, which comes in and works with our students at 4th grade, and they do the same thing.
Do we have another question? Over in the corner.
I'm the fastest employee at NewSchools, it turns out.
Thanks. Ann Waterman-Roy. I live down on the peninsula and work here mostly with South San Francisco Unified, so some of y'all may have heard our fabulous superintendent talking earlier. My question is, a lot of the conversation we've talked about so far is around the interventions around extra time, around tutoring, et cetera. And I'm wondering what else, can you speak a little to what else you've been doing for the teachers in your classrooms day to day, sort of tier 1 instruction? I know there's been a lot of other stuff you've been working on around that too. You mentioned science reading. What are some of the things that you have done during this same time to transform the experience that students are having in their classroom so that it can be built on by the intervention work?
I would say in the background of a lot of those things, in DC, we updated our social studies standards for the first time in 17 years. The direct question around the training for science of reading, which a lot of folks don't talk about, we incentivized our teachers using ESSER dollars to get letters training, and then we were very clear about which trainings were of high quality and would be approved by the state education agency. And so they're in the background, when you think about high quality instructional materials, we were really clear about what we meant by high quality. So you actually can't just have anything living and breathing inside your classrooms. They have to be evaluated. They have to be approved. And we really thought, I have a lot of DC people in the room, but we thought, like, how do we actually think about professional development in new ways that meet the teachers where they are? And fun fact, when we incentivized these options for teachers took the opportunity. Like, we have a very false narrative about what teachers, who they are, how they want to show up. Teachers want to do right by the students that they serve. We just have to create opportunities and ways for them to become better. I don't think there's a teacher in this country that wakes up every day and says, I want to suck. But you can't say, go take letters training, which is 2 years of time, a significant amount of money, and not think about how you compensate them, how you control for the school year, how do you make sure it's high quality, and how do you make sure that they can go back into the school they came from to implement the training. So I think it has to be a both and. We have a lot of unfunded mandates in this country, and then they fall on the plates of teachers, and then they get blamed when the through line isn't achieved. But you, Dr. Sullivan.
In Compton, rich investment in professional development, site literacy coaches funded by the state of California. But in addition to that, we have literacy coaches at this school site responsible for professional development, going into the classroom, providing coaching. We also have teachers that develop resources, because we know that the curriculum that we've adopted falls very short of what is expected. So we want that alignment between curriculum, instruction, and assessment, and we've done very well with that in having our teachers develop better resources that are actually better than the curriculum that we're using, so that our students understand the academic language that they need in order to even navigate through the assessment. You know, I'm tired of people talking about this, teaching to the test. Well, if a kid doesn't understand the academic vocabulary, how can they even take the test? So we take the time to make sure that our teachers understand that academic vocabulary and that gap or that difference that exists within the curriculum and the assessment, and we take the time to make sure that our students are very well aware of the academic language that they need to know in order to do well on state assessments.
And in Alabama, we have a Literacy Act, which says that students, if they're not reading on grade level by third grade, they are likely to repeat. And then we have a Numeracy Act for fifth grade. And so with those acts, there are certain requirements that are tied to it. In Birmingham, and I mentioned this earlier about the inverted pyramid, as we began to change the way we do instruction in our schools, we focus very heavily on Tier 1 instruction and ensuring that our teachers are providing students with grade level material. And when they don't come up to grade level, they provide scaffolds for those students. We have instructional frameworks similar to what they're doing in Compton. We have our teachers come in. Dr. Williams has a team of teachers who work on our instructional frameworks every summer, work on our curriculum every summer based on what our data is showing us. So if it's showing us that we're deficient in this, then we have our teachers come in and we begin to work, and they have buy-in to that. We provide incentives for our teachers to get letters trained. Professional development is key. One of the things that we did coming out of the pandemic, I started 2 different departments. One department, we provided some additional supports for professional development, because what we began to see was a lot of teachers coming in with alternative certifications without having that pedagogy and education, so we had to provide training for them. Second one was a Department of Post-Secondary Success. It used to be Post-Secondary Readiness. Post-secondary success works with our high school students around, dual enrollment, around early college, around CTE, so that we can make sure that one student, the goal should not be that students get to the 12th grade and graduate. The goal should be that students graduate and can be successful when they leave because of what we have provided them in our school district. And that's a different way of thinking. So we really wanted to push that, what post-secondary success is. And so we're really doing a lot of work around not just what happens in the school, but the whole child, and providing the family, children with the needs that they need in order to be successful.
I mean, we can clap for that. A closing thought. You all are in it. You're staying the course in it. What's the advice for districts that are trying to get the ground that you guys have already covered? What's your closing advice to those leaders?
So I would say start with data. You start with data. You also have to be relentless, because there is a tide of people who like the way things are, because they are very, very comfortable in the way things are, even if the way things are not showing academic outcomes for students. So you got to be relentless in your expectations of excellence for students. And oftentimes when you're working with Black and brown students, that there are very few people who will speak up to say that this is not right, because they think it is normal for Black and brown children not to be successful. And we have to say that it's not right. So you have to follow your data, be relentless, and also be strategic. You can't do everything, but you have to do those things that actually move the needle on student achievement and student success. And then, think about the whole child. We didn't go into social emotional learning, but we do a lot of work around how we support students and families in Birmingham. And so, think about how we support the whole child, because we brought in Karen Mapp. I don't know, many of you know who she is.
A proud faculty member of the Harvard Graduate School of Education.
We brought her to Birmingham because one of the things I wanted to share with our principals and our teachers is that parent engagement is not an add-on, but it's a strategy in improving student outcomes. So we really wanted to make sure that we were partnering with our families, that we were engaging our parent families in a meaningful way. And then once we get that hook, students want to come to school. We moved from, in 2 years, having a chronic absenteeism rate of 29% to cutting it in 2 years to 14%. And it's about how we engage our students and our families.
Thank you. Dr. Brawley?
I would say there's a Darinism, and it's, in God we trust, all others bring data. So bring the data, use the data to inform your decisions. What is the data telling you about how you're performing? What areas is it identifying as areas in need of improvement? And then what is the what are the interventions and what is the professional development that's going to be invested in around what that data is revealing. So, it's clear. Nothing gets done without analyzing data. Nothing gets done without setting SMART goals and fixing a plan to improve those outcomes. And nothing gets done without developing the individuals responsible for that. A lot of our school leaders are new to the profession. They don't know what they don't know. And they're not going to know what they need to know without investing in professional development. Take time to do walkthroughs, to learn from those that are consistently producing results so that they can see what good first instruction looks like, what great interventions look like, so that people can learn throughout the system.
And I would say be really aware of who's fighting alongside you in the arena. And so publicly, Michelle, Kat, Josh, Naomi, Maya, and any other person that is literally fighting like hell for the children of Washington, D.C., thank you for fighting alongside me. And stay the course in telling the truth around what's possible for all the children in the country. Thank you all for taking some time to learn from us today. And we'll be here to talk now that the session is over. Thanks.